front-end web development class. We'll start our recap. We're going to talk about CSS. This class on floats and flexbox and all following classes until the end of the series are going to be talking about CSS for the most part. So, how's it going?
Hi.
Hello.
Is this different from the other thing going on?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, this is the front-end web development class. Python's going on in the room next door. And then circuit hacking is happening with.
Cool. So this is like you guys are reviewing from last week, and then the new set's at 8.
Indeed. Yeah, definitely.
Is it okay if I leave it here?
Oh, yeah, that's cool.
Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. That's cool. Yeah, so what should I talk about? So in the previous class, we talked about CSS positioning. CSS positioning allows us to move elements anywhere we want on the entire screen. So we can take a look at what we looked at last week. If you don't have the material, then you can easily download it. If you know how to use Git, then the easiest thing is to clone the class materials. You just go ahead and run this in the terminal. If not, then you can go to the FWD repository, which is available right here, and just press the download zip button, and that'll download zip file of all of the previous materials for the class. Oh yeah, Wi-Fi is noise bridge. Yes, indeed. So let's see here. I think, yeah, last week was class 15.
Use the noise bridge jacket.
It's oh yeah, no, I'm sorry. So this is it right here. It's my personal GitHub repository. JEFFREYHW. Yeah, welcome. So you can go ahead and clone this or download this, and eventually, when you do, you want to go into Series 9, Class 15, and then take a look at index.html. One thing that you might need if you don't have it already is just a good text editor. If you're already familiar, then you're fine. Otherwise, all you really need is just some sort of code-based text editor and a web browser.
We're opening up the HTML.
Yeah. So index.html looks like this. We worked on this last week, and it looks silly, but the idea behind it was that we're basing it off of a mock-up, which looks pretty much exactly like this. We had a little bit of annotations about how far certain things should be from certain edges of the screen, you know, how big certain fonts should be, stuff like that. But we put this page together in somewhat of a rudimentary fashion, which is that we use CSS positioning to allow us to move certain elements to the right and to the left of one another, underneath one another, into certain corners of the boxes that contain them, and things like that. So what we can do is go ahead and just inspect one of these guys. Doesn't really matter. Just right-click anywhere on the screen, and I'm going to put this on the bottom here. Right-click anywhere on the screen and choose to inspect. And this will open up the developer tools here. Within the developer tools, we can start to see how this page is put together. So what we first need to see is that we've applied some styling to the body itself. Of course, we've done that by writing into style.css, which we've linked up here in the head. And what we said specifically is that the body has, oops, I went for the wrong tab just now, sorry. It has a margin of 0 auto, position of relative, and width 960. So margin and width are things that we're familiar with at this point in the class. Width, of course, determines how many pixels wide this body should be. Margin 0 auto is a little trick to be able to move a block element into the center of the screen, given that it has a width. Specifying auto margin horizontally, that is to say margin right auto and margin left auto, which is kind of the longhand version of 0 auto here, applies an equal amount of margin, or this orange area, on the left and the right of the body. We'll get back to position relative in a second. Let's see. Next up, Ned's Grocery. Pretty straightforward. All we did was center this guy. So, you know, getting rid of H1, it's over here on the left. But with H1, it's over here in the center. But that's weird. When I move it to the left, it seems like it's being underlapped by our grand reopening H2. So what's going on there? What we learned last week is that we can apply something called position absolute to this grand reopening heading here. And when we do that, we see that it changes from something that looks like this to something that looks like this. So this right here is just a plain old heading with a red background and yellow text. We know that headings, just like H1 and H2 here, stretch all the way across the screen because they're block elements. Block elements, we know that they're block elements because if we scroll down here and look at the user agent style sheet properties, we see display block. If you see that, then it's a block element. That means that it's going to stack on top of other block elements and it will stretch as far as it can. So H1 and H2, as you can see, they're stretching all the way across. H2 looks longer than H1 simply because it's got a red background, you know? So that's what's making it stretch all the way across. But when we give it a position of absolute, a few things happen. One thing is it doesn't stretch all the way across. Another thing is that the space that it took up on the page seems to have disappeared. By giving something a position of absolute, the rest of the page acts as if it's not there. Whatever's above it, below it, surrounding it, anything simply acts as if that element does not exist on the page. So this element has now been sort of removed from the context of the page and is free to be moved around wherever we want it to be moved around. Specifically, we gave this thing a left and a top property. These left, right, bottom, and top properties allow us to provide offsets for these elements that allow us to move them relative to other things on the page. So we're saying that this is 100 pixels from the left of something, and it's 0 pixels from the top of something. It's obviously not 100 pixels from the left of the entire window, because this is more than 100 right here. And it's not 0 pixels from the top of the window, because there's a certain amount of space right here. So what specifically is this 0 pixels from the top of and 100 pixels from the left of? Well, we can tell by navigating up our chain here until we see some sort of element that has a position of relative. If anything has a position of relative or absolute, then it sort of serves as the origin for all elements that appear underneath it that are also positioned absolutely. So in other words, by saying that this body is position relative, as you can see this blue area here is the body, the upper left corner is top 0, left 0. The upper right corner is top 0, right 0. So by saying H2 is left 100 and top 0, it is 100 from the left of the body. And it is 0 from the top of the body, as we can see right there. And of course, you know, we change these values and we'll see how it moves around. You know, I'm incrementing the left. Now I'm moving it back to where it was. You know, and you can even give negative values to this top thing. So if I want to give it top negative 20 pixels, then now it's up there. Negative 21 pixels. Of course, if I really wanted to align it, you know, to the page itself, I'd probably maybe, well, I can't take it out of the body because that's what H2's, that's where all the elements go. But I could do something to put it at the very, very top of the page if I really wanted to. Anyway, just reloading this to get back to where we were. So that is why this H2 seems to be floating in space somewhere. It's because it's been given a position absolute, and then it's been offset in a certain way. Any questions at this point? Make sense? Cool. So next up, we have a UL. UL, unordered list, has 4 list items inside it, each with a class: cheese, chicken, fruit, bread. Now, this UL has been given an explicit height of 600 pixels. It also has a list style of none, padding of none, padding of 0. List style and padding can be applied to a UL to take away its default styling, which gives a little bit of padding on the left for bullet points to appear, essentially. And list style none gets rid of those actual bullet points for any list items inside it. Now, height 600, we gave it to this because we're doing something really weird with these list items. Something that's a little unconventional and something that I would that at the end of this class we'll realize is actually kind of silly because there are better ways of doing this. But what we're doing specifically is we're saying this UL is 600 pixels tall. It goes all the way down there. It's also 960 pixels wide simply because it's inside the body. It's a block element, as shown right here, which means that it stretches all the way across. but it's inside the body, so that means it's 960 across because that's how wide the body is, right? So 960 by 600. We also see that it's been given a position of relative, which means that if anything inside this is being positioned absolutely, it's going to be positioned relative to this element. So all of a sudden, this serves as a new origin point, or the corners of this element serve as the new origin edges, corners, for anything inside it. So let's take a look at number 1, cheese. List item number 1, cheese, has a top of 0, position of absolute. Every list item inside, every list item on the page has a height of 300 and a width of 480 and a position of absolute and a border of 2 pixels solid black. Actually, this top 0 doesn't even matter. We could get rid of it and nothing changes. What's happening here is that this li is sitting where it would otherwise have been sat because it is the first child of the UL, and the first child of anything will try to sit in the upper left corner of it if it has a width. Otherwise, it'll just stretch all the way across and sit at the top, right? So being given an explicit width and height, it is going to be in the upper left. Being given a position of absolute doesn't really affect anything right now, other than the fact that, well, you know, if I undo the position of absolute on this one specifically, nothing will change because all these other ones are also absolutely positioned, meaning that they don't affect the placement of each other. If you move one of them, it does not affect how anything else moves or is positioned, as long as they have a little bit of offset of their own. Like this chicken box here has a right of 0 and a top of 0. Top of 0, again, doesn't really matter because it would have been in the top anyway. Unless, the fact is that if these were not absolutely positioned, they would actually be stacked on top of each other. Like here's cheese, here's chicken, here's fruit, and then here's, well, where bread would be, but we got some problems. But anyway, the fact is that they stack on top of each other because that's what block elements do, right? But because cheese is positioned absolutely, that means that chicken would otherwise have been at the very top because the thing that came before it was also positioned absolutely, as in the chicken has nothing behind it or above it to really push it downward. So that's why this top of 0 doesn't really matter, because regardless, it would have been on the top anyway, sitting right at the top here. But right of 0 does matter. We see that by getting rid of this right of 0, it's actually overlapping our cheese box, right? That is because, again, this cheese thing, this chicken doesn't treat it like it's there, and the chicken otherwise would have been in the upper left corner had it not been positioned absolutely. But it is, and we say right 0, and this 0 corresponds to the very right edge of this UL, so that means that it is going to be moved over to the right. Okay? Next, fruit is bottom 0. Note we didn't specify a left. We didn't have to because, again, it would have sat on the left anyway. Finally, bread, bottom 0, right 0. Both of those are important because we don't want it in the upper left, we want it in the bottom right. So there we go, 0 from the bottom and the right of the UL that it's inside because the UL is position relative. Okay, now next, let's take a look at stuff inside here. Each one of these list items has an H2, an image, and a div with a class of price. So cheese, here's the H2, cheese, here's the image, and here's the div, the price. As you can see, each one of these has the different items positioned in different corners, or just differently. So for example, cheese H2 is 20 from the top and 20 from the left. That only works because we've said that every single element that is a direct child of the list item, of any list item on the page, is position absolute. So that means that if it is a child of the list item, an H2, an image, or a div, as you can see it's inside it, then it will be absolutely positioned, not affect the placement or anything else next to it or around it or underneath it or whatever. Yeah, so first of all, we're saying that this H2 specifically is 20 from the top and 20 from the left. And as we can see, it is. But 20 from the left and 20 from the top of what? Is it from the top of UL or LI? In this case, it's LI, because LI has a position of absolute. And I mentioned earlier that anything with either a position of absolute or relative serve as the new origin point of anything inside it. So we didn't have to say, like, position absolute and relative. It's just that we give it absolute, it's going to position itself wherever we want based on the offset we give it, and it serves as the new origin point of anything inside it. So that's why H2 is now 20 down and 20 to the right from its list item container. Let's see. Next up, this cheese image is on the left and on the bottom. Again, it is absolutely positioned because everything inside a list item is absolutely positioned. And this price is on the right and on the top. Again, top doesn't matter, but anyway, there we go. And every price we've styled to be red and have a font size of 3M, that is to say 3 times the font size of other text. Okay, next up, chicken. Another pretty straightforward thing. This chicken is bottom 20, right 20. It is, 20 from the bottom, 20 from the right. Now, something that we should note here is stacking order. Now, not stacking order in terms of what's above what, like from 1, 2, 3 down, like going down the page. It's stacking order of what is actually on top of one another from a z-index perspective. We talk about 3 dimensions. We're talking about the x-axis, that's horizontal, y-axis is vertical, and the z-index is depth. Why does this matter? Because the H2 being the first will automatically be behind everything that comes after it. And that usually doesn't matter until you start positioning things actually on top of each other. Like we have with this chicken here, this image of chicken. You see that it is overlapping this H2 chicken. But the reason that this H2 is on top is because we gave it a z-index of 1. If I were to uncheck this, you'd see that it would go behind it instead. So z-index is a number that you can give something, and the higher it is, the more it will stack on top of other things with a z-index that's less than it. The fact is that nothing else on this page has a z-index, so giving it a z-index of 1 will automatically make it on top of anything that does not have that. So there we go. That is why this H2 is on top of chicken, despite chicken coming after it. And finally, let's see, price. Price does not have a z-index because it comes after chicken, so it's going to be sitting on top of it anyway. Okay, next up, let's take a look at fruit. Assorted fruit looks like every H2, not only the one inside chicken, but also fruit has a z-index of 1, so it's going to be on top of the image regardless of the fact that it comes before it in our HTML. Fruit, we didn't really style the fruit at all. It shows up in the upper left. Finally, price, we didn't style that either. It's also in the upper left. So that's pretty straightforward. Finally, bread. Now this is where things get a little complicated. Bread is not positioned to the left, not positioned to the right. It's in the middle, but there is no middle offset. You can't say it's 0 pixels from the center or the middle of something. So how do we make it in the center? Interestingly enough, we gave this a left and a right of 0, both left and right, which in effect stretches it out. Again, we remember that block elements regularly stretch out, but because it's position absolute, it does not stretch out. But because it's left and right 0, it stretches out again. So what would have originally been stretchy and then became unstretched is stretched yet again by using left and right 0. That's one of 2 ways that we could do it. Instead of doing left and right 0, we could also say width equals 100%. That will work just the same way. That will also stretch across. Again, width 100% is usually not necessary because that is what block elements do, but it's not what absolutely positioned elements do. So that's why we have to specify that. So either left and right 0 or width 100%, they both work. Now, why is the word bread in the middle? Simply because the fact that this thing stretches all the way across and we applied a text align of center means that it's centered text. Just as if you were using a word processor and press the center button. That's what's going on there, right?
So can you not just do text center? You have to do left, right, just to make it evenly.
If I don't specify a left and a right of 0, then my absolutely positioned heading is only going to, the box itself is only going to go that far. So while the text is centered, it's centered within that blue box.
Yeah.
See?
Yeah.
So we have to remember that an element is comprised of 2 things, the box itself and its contents. And so if the box itself is only as big as its contents, then text align isn't really going to do us any help, any favors. So by stretching the box itself across, now all of a sudden text align has meaning, which means it puts it into the center.
The equal to 0, $0.
I don't know. I'm not sure what's going on there. I think this could be something that my React plugin is doing. I don't really know why that's there. Don't worry about it.
How about margin zero auto doesn't work for some reason?
Margin zero auto doesn't work because absolutely positioned elements can't be given a margin that's relative to something else. By saying, well, you can say like that an absolutely positioned thing has a margin left of 20. That pretty much has the exact same effect of giving it a left of 20. But by giving it a margin left or a margin right of auto or something, absolutely positioned elements don't have containers. And so you really can't say that it's going to push itself automatically from the left and the right of something that contains it, because nothing contains it. So that's why automatic margin doesn't work with absolutely positioned elements. So that is why if you do want to center something, well, we have to do something a little crazy like this. This bread image is centered within the bigger list item that it's inside. We see that it's got an equal amount space above it and below it and to the left and to the right of it. That is something that's a little hacky and a little difficult to do before this class, this upcoming class, where I'll be talking about flexbox, which makes it actually really easy. But right now, it's a little hard. So look at what we've got here. It's a little strange. Left 50%, top 50%, margin left negative 200 pixels, margin top negative 132.5 pixels. So what is going on there? Let's say one thing. If we know the size of our container, and we do, this container is specifically 480 by 300. We could do something as simple as saying that this bread, we just take the height of it, we subtract that from the height of the list item, we divide that by 2 and give the list item, or give this thing like a top of that amount, and all of a sudden it's centered. But what if we didn't know the list item's height? What if it, or width? What if it changed? What if I started increasing this width and height? Of course, this is what happens when we align things to the corner. They start to grow and overlap each other, like it's going, like what's happening over there. But now that this list item is a little bit bigger, that image of bread is still centered inside it. The reason for that is twofold. One, it's got hey, where is it? Yeah, it's got a left of 50% and a top of 50%. That 50% value corresponds to the height and the width of the relative container that it's inside. So in this case, it's the LI. So this LI right now is 504 by 329. So top of 50% is half of 329. That's how far it's going to be pushed down. So now it's being pushed down. Let me undo that list item stuff because it makes it a little harder to understand what's going on. 1 second. What to do? Okay, so here's our list item. Here's our bread. Our bread, you'll notice that the upper left corner of our bread is in the exact center of the list item, right? So that's not so great, though. We don't want the upper left corner to be in the center. We want the center to be in the center, right? We want the center of the bread to be in the center of the box. So how do we do that? Well, we simply offset this image of bread by half of its width and half of its height by using another thing that pushes it around, which is margin left and margin top. So since this bread image is 400 across, we simply offset it to the left by 200, and we offset it above by half of 265, which is 132.5. And now, regardless of how big its container is, it's always going to be centered. Now, of course, this only works if you know the height and the width of the box that you're trying to center. If you don't know the height and the width of the actual thing you're trying to center, in addition, I'm sorry, you don't need to know the height of the container, but you do need to know the height of the thing you're centering. Otherwise, it's not going to work. You're going to have to take some sort of wild guess or whatever.
An image, and you go look to see how many pixels it is in the original size.
Yeah, I found that out. Yeah, I had to discover that. I had to like go to my assets thing, like take a look at bread and see, oh look, it's 400 by 265. That's what my little image info says. So I took those and I hard coded those values into my CSS. That value hard coding can be offset by more futuristic methods. There are these preprocessors for your CSS that can go ahead and look up the dimensions of an image for you and insert those values into your code without you having to look it up yourself and do the math, which works great because if you have to change the image later on, then those values are automatically updated. So that's really cool stuff, but I'll talk about that in a later class.
Is that related to flexbox?
I'm sorry?
Is that related to flexbox?
It's not related to flexbox. That's related to SAS, just the ability to pre-process CSS or post-process, depending on what school you adhere to. Either way, yeah, that's what can provide those values for you. But either way, this little method of centering something by applying both offset and margin is a little bit of a silly but functional way of centering something within a variable width box. But one variable width box that you might be dealing with is your entire screen, right? Like if we undid the position relative on this, everything's really weird now. But now all of a sudden, our UL is the relatively positioned thing. But you see that this image of bread is in the exact center of the UL, right? Furthermore, if we take the position relative off of this UL, now this bread is centered in the exact center of the entire body. If I were to zoom out, oops, if I were to zoom out a little bit. Oh, well, not exactly. Oh, okay, so the body is this big. For some reason, oh, it's because these things are absolute. Yeah, so this UL is this large, this body is this large, and the bread is exactly in the middle of that. Why are things dropping out underneath the body? It's because they're absolutely positioned. These list items are still absolutely positioned, which means they don't stretch out their containers, which means the body is not as large as the highest stuff on the page. If we undid position absolute for certain things, then it would work better. This guy, maybe. Actually, I don't really know why they're not stretching out. Oh, it's because I gave this, I'm sorry, it's because I gave this an explicit height. There we go. By undoing the height on this list item, on this UL, the list items don't flow outside of it. And so now all of a sudden this image of bread is actually in the center of everything else on the page. So there you go. That's silly stuff. You can do that. Okay, so those are some weird examples, but this is, let me go ahead and refresh this back to as it was. That is a big, really hard and fast overview of absolute positioning. Cool. Any questions, thoughts, confusions?
Would a vertical line where you're centering the image, is that a text?
Great question. There is a value called vertical align. Vertical align only applies to inline elements. So you can't use vertical align to vertically align just any sort of block within its container. It really only works when you've got stuff that is on the same line as something else, that is to say that it is not a block element. So if you have something like image, like word, text, oh sorry, word, image, word. You could apply a vertical align to that image, and if you give it like a vertical align of top, its top would be aligned to the rest of the text on that line. Vertical align of bottom, all of a sudden it would be sitting at the bottom. Its bottom would be sitting with the rest of the text. At least I hope I don't have those backwards. But in terms of just in terms of an absolute position thing, vertical align has no effect. It might have an effect on inline stuff inside it, text or other sorts of inline elements inside that thing, but not the actual image itself. So yeah, I wish I could give a little bit more of an example, but I'm running out of time. I don't want to spend too much on it. But yeah, no problem. Vertical align actually does work pretty well when you have a single line of text that you need to line up inside a container. If you have something, say, that's like 100 pixels high, and you just want to have like a line of text that's centered, like, vertically centered within that box. What you do actually is you give that text a line height equal to the size of the container. In fact, the line height can determine the height of the container. So you say, like, just have some text, give it a line height of 100, and it will automatically be vertically aligned within that 100 pixels height. So line height, and then you give it vertical align, all of a sudden it can sit at the bottom of that line, or at the top of that line, or whatever. But by default, give something a line height of something, and it will go ahead and just vertically align itself. That is if it's only a single line of text. If it's two lines of text, then all of a sudden you've got 100 and then 100 again, and the two lines are very far apart from each other, and the effect goes away, right? Like line 1 with text in the middle, line 2 with text in the middle, all of a sudden those text lines are very far apart. So, but either way, single lines of text, that works great. Okay. Any questions online? Nope. All right. So let's go ahead and start on our new stuff. This is the front-end web development class. I'm going to be talking over the automated voice, which is telling you to donate to NoiseBridge, which you can. There's a little box over there. Put your money in there. Or you go to donate.noisebridge.net and help start a little recurring donation. So cool, good stuff. Anyway, this class is about floats and flexbox. I used to have a separate class on flexbox, but it turns out that it's really simple and does not really require a 2-hour period for me to go through it. Floating, on the other hand, is a little more complex. Floating is the kind of old and busted, but still probably necessary to understand, way to stack objects on the page horizontally rather than vertically. We just took a look at vertical stacking, where you have one element after another, and it just goes down the page, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But there are many, many, many circumstances where you want to have certain things that flow from left to right. One really good example that I like to give is the front page of the New York Times. New York Times has a bunch of floated elements going 1, 2, 3, 4. Like here are 4 main columns on the New York Times. Column 1, column 2, column 3, column 4. And some of those columns are interesting in that some things kind of span across them, like this guy here. Some columns kind of split off into little side things. I don't know. This is 3 columns where this is 2. This is a wider column than that one. This image is to the right of this text. So there's that. What we can do is we can see how floating affects this page by toggling the floating on the page. So let's go ahead and see what we're talking about here. I've gone ahead and inspected the New York Times, and what I'm looking for is classes of column. See how this div has a class of AB column, column, A column, column, wide B layout. Let's see, what else? There's C column. Inside this section, there's probably an A column somewhere, and then there's a B column. I think A and B column, what makes them differ is that A is a certain width, whereas B column is a different width, 375 instead of 177. So that's just how they call them, A, B, C, whatever. But what makes them actually columns, what stacks them onto the left and the right of one another instead of on top of each other, is this rule, float left. Let's see what happens when I get rid of float left on every single column on this page. Where'd everything go? Looks like it's underneath it. This is what the New York Times looks like. Ooh, that's not good. This is what the New York Times looks like if you disable floating. Now this might look a little familiar to you. Well, I guess this is a different thing than a column. Oh, it's because it's an advertisement instead. But this might look a little familiar to you because if you've ever opened up the New York Times on your phone, then it's a single column, right? So floating, or just in most cases, horizontal alignment is really especially helpful for screens wider than mobile devices. So you only really need to use them if you're developing for wide desktop displays. You might say, well, of course I'm going to be developing for wide desktop displays. Not necessarily. What you should know as beginning or veteran web developers is that you are no longer targeting a desktop, laptop audience first and foremost. In most cases, depending on the industry, but in most cases, you are targeting a mobile audience. You are making web pages for people on phones and possibly people on tablets, but more likely people on phones. So a site like this, even though it's a little silly looking, is probably a lot easier, a lot more accessible, easier to use than a site like this, where you would have to, you'd have to zoom in on specific columns to see what that text is, lest it kind of like show up as really, really small on your page. Actually, it's funny. When the iPhone first came out in 2007, they used the New York Times as an example of a site that allows you to double tap or like pinch to zoom in on a specific column that you want to see. Obviously, nowadays, websites are responsive, which means that depending on how big your screen is, they adapt and change their CSS around to make it look good on your screen. And we'll talk about mobile responsive design in a later class as well. But anyway, as you can see, floating is very important on this page specifically, which gets certain things to sit to the left of one another. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce a little mock-up for today's class, and we're going to start to understand how floating helps us develop that. Yeah, so let's see, take a mock-up. Yes, what I'd like you guys to do is go to the wiki page, front-end web development, scroll down to the bottom and click on this link right here, mock-up. Click that and download what you get. As usual, I'd recommend that if you have downloaded the class materials for this class before, from GitHub, that you don't do your work inside the folder that you downloaded. I recommend that you do your work outside of that folder because the folder you downloaded is a Git repository. It could update with more stuff, and if you try to update it later and it conflicts with anything you've done, you're going to have to move your stuff out or re-download or do other stuff. So I'd recommend creating your own folder for class materials, for your own class materials if you haven't done that already. This is noisebridge.net/FWD. That's the easiest way of getting to it. noisebridge.net/FWD. And then you scroll down and click on this guy down here. Here's my Radical website. So this website is, oh man, what do they call it? The Holy Grail or something of columns or something. A while ago, people really wanted to make 3-column websites. They wanted to make columns that were left, middle, and right. And honestly, I made this page a long time ago, back in like 2011, just as a demo. So it's a silly thing. But as you can see, this header stretches all the way across, but it does have certain things on the left and the right. These sidebars stretch all the way down, and they're on the left and the right of the main content, this white area. This cool picture of me, this autobiographical portrait that I had made of myself, is over here on the right, where the text is on the left of it. Yeah, so there we go. That's kind of how this works. We're going to go ahead and make this page. Cool. So let's go ahead and open up our text editor and start making the page. That's not it. My own lunch app that I've been working on. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder for my work for today's class. I'm going to go into FWD, Series 9. For me, this is class 16, and I'm going to create an index.html. So go ahead and create a new folder and save index.html into said folder. All right. So if you're using Sublime Text, you can type HTML and then press Tab, and it'll fill all that out for you. HTML tab will fill all this out for you. If not, just go ahead and type this in.
I think we could meta trust into 8 line.
That's fine. That's actually good. That's just assuming that the website you're going to make is going to be in Unicode, which is a good assumption to make. Unicode allows you to use any character known to man, essentially, more than just usual English letters and numbers, punctuation. Yeah. Cool. All right. So what is the title of this page? My Radical Website, according to the little tab here. My Radical Website. Great. So what we do initially, every time that we're given a mock-up and we have to start turning it into HTML, is we write the HTML first and the CSS second. That is very important because we want to think about the content of the page before we think about how the page looks. It's content first that is the most important part. Styling can come later. So I'm just going to go ahead and set these things to the right of one another. 1 second. Great. If you want to do the same thing on Mac OS, you swipe up with 4 fingers, and you drag stuff into this bar here. You can drag one on top of the other and get a little split screen view. That's cool. All right. So without any instruction whatsoever, last week we had a bunch of different sorts of annotations all over this thing saying specifically what widths are. I don't have that this week, so just follow, but it's okay. For right now, we're just writing HTML, so follow my lead. First of all, we're going to create our header. Our header contains our heading and these little boxes as well. So first of all, header. Our header element has our heading in it, my radical website. Oh, exclamation point. Then it has truly the best personal website ever. Yes, it is naive as well. This isn't a typing class, so if you don't want to type that whole thing in, it's completely fine. I don't expect you to type all the content. That's not what this class is about, but I do expect you to type every HTML element. So, you know, just smash it on the keyboard if you need. Okay. Next up, we have a sidebar, main content, and then another sidebar. Sidebars can be written using the aside element. Aside is good for content that is tangential to your main content. That is the definition of an aside tag. So they're great for sidebars. Okay, so inside this aside, we are going to create another H1. Sites I know all about. So you might be saying, why another H1? Why would we create an H1 when it's not the main heading of the page? Interestingly enough, certain elements in HTML allow you to sort of reset your headings. They're known as sectioning elements, where when you create them on the page, your heading number can be reset because anything that's inside them is considered not the main content of your page anymore. So that includes aside. It actually doesn't include header. This H1 inside header is the H1 of the page. But H1 in aside means all of a sudden it is the heading of that aside, not of the entire page. So you don't have to say H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, H6. Oh no, I ran out of headings. You can just say, I've got a new sectioning element, so my numbering can restart. I no longer have to worry about running out of elements or remembering which heading I used, right? That's always kind of iffy. Okay, sites I know all about. Here's an unordered list. Here's a list item. Inside the list item, there's a link to Google. And then there's a paragraph. And then you can go ahead once you write that and just copy and paste it 4 times. We're not going to differentiate all these. Please don't waste your time changing this to Yahoo and Noisebridge and Apple and stuff. All right. Cool. So that's our aside. Our aside contains our H1 and then our unordered list, which contains 4 list items, each containing a hyperlink and a paragraph. Cool. Next up, after the aside, is our main content. We use the main tag for that. Main content also functions as a sectioning element, I believe. So we can say H1. Hi there. I might be wrong about that. I forget whenever. This is my cool site. Site. All right. So this image of me, Jeffrey, with this text underneath it, is what's known as a figure. This figure, this is a figure because not only you wouldn't use the figure element for just any image on the page, but you'd use it when you want to provide an image along with the description that relates to the content of your page. You talk about this is my super cool site, and so you might want to know who I am. So using a figure next to that content is a great idea. So I'm going to go ahead and create a figure. And inside a figure, there's almost always an image. I haven't added me.jpg yet. We're going to have to go find this version of Tom Seller. I mean me. And then finally, underneath that, there is a fig caption. Cool picture of me. Interestingly enough, if you've been very perceptive, you might remember that most images need an alt. We added alts to our previous images in our previous class with the image of the apple, the fruits and the chicken and the cheese and the bread. This time we don't need it. Specific reason we don't need an alt on this image tag is because it is sitting right next to a fig caption, which describes the image. So this is pretty much the only instance in which you have an illustrative image on the page, or that is to say, a relevant content-based image on the page that doesn't need an alt attribute because it's right next to a fig caption. So just a little trivia there. Next up, we have a subheading and then a table. I originally tried to go through writing all this table out, but it does not matter for this class. This class is not talking about tables specifically, so I'm going to just skip that and just do H2 chart detailing how great I am, and then just create a table and not put anything inside it. Okay. I should mention that you might have been told as a developer that tables are bogus, that you shouldn't use them. I disagree. You should definitely use tables when you have data to display. In fact, I probably put a table here to show you, hey, can't you just surround your entire website in a big old table and treat the rows and the cells as different parts of your page? Like to have the whole thing just really be kind of a spreadsheet under the covers that's just been restyled to look like something else? You could do that, but then it would be a spreadsheet. You would be dealing with you would have to deal with rows and columns and like aligning things up and giving certain things a row or column span and whatever else.
Can't you just put divs?
Yeah, you can do that with divs, and you can do that without having to create a big table. The reason people found tables to be cool is because they didn't have to think so much about the width of certain things and stacking them to the left or the right or underneath one another. All of a sudden, you just have this concept of rows and columns, and you're just set, right? But the problem is that all of a sudden those pages are very, very hard to make responsive because you want to reduce it down to a single column. You can't do that with a table. That's just not what they're built for. Additionally, any sort of search engine or any sort of screen reader for blind people or otherwise would interpret the page as a spreadsheet. It would say, which row and column do you want to go to? You know, and they'd go, what do you mean row and column? I thought this was a page about a person. Like, why would there be a whole bunch of data there? That doesn't make much sense.
The screen readers were not into nested with a nested.
Yeah, and they'd have to look into nested tables, which are just silly. Why would you nest one spreadsheet inside the cell of another spreadsheet? That doesn't make any sense. So that's what people used to do. Please don't do that. We're going to learn about floating and flexbox instead, which kind of alleviates that thing. But anyway, here's a table. We're just going to leave that blank. Okay, next up. Finally, we have another aside following the main. And this aside is pretty much just like the other one. H1, all of the tweets, and then an unordered list. I'm not going to fill out that unordered list unless you want to like fill it in yourself. It's pretty straightforward. Actually, you know what? I take it back. I am going to fill it out because it just does illustrate one thing, that hyperlinks are inline. So if I had something like, you know, something like that, you'll see that this is all one line. That unlike block elements like UL, LI, H1, aside, main, figure, all of these things, that this hyperlink here, this anchor tag, and this time tag can all stay on the same line. And they don't break onto a new thing. As you can see, 4 hours ago sits right next to just what a great day, and it's all one big thing. So these are examples of inline elements which do not stack on top of one another. They're simply in line with one another. And if you want to copy that 3 times, be my guest. Please don't fill them all out. Okay. And that is all of our content. So we're done writing our HTML. It's 8:19. Great. Okay. So we are going to start styling this page. And we're going to start looking at floats first. Then we're going to look at flexbox. This page can be done with both floats or flexbox. The reason that I'm choosing floats first is because they've been around for longer. That's not the best reason. But they are easier. They are not easier. They're not easier. They are more ubiquitous, and more browsers can interpret them. more browsers can understand them. Flexbox is a much newer set of standards that not every browser out there can understand. Specifically, Internet Explorer 11 and below have some trouble understanding certain parts of Flexbox. 10 barely understands it at all. It's not even supported at all in 9. 9 is still used a little bit. 10 is barely used at all. 11 is still used. So there are some cases in which, depending on your audience or your market, that you might not want to use Flexbox, despite it being a little bit easier in some ways. That said, floating has been around for a very long time and it works on every browser. So let's talk about that first. Okay. Go ahead and open up this HTML page in your browser.
Before you kind of sounds, would you look at your HTML and organize first? Like, would you look at it and kind of be like, I want to, like, why wouldn't you first put them all in divs so that you know if your lists all want to be a certain style or your things want to be a certain style, you do that first?
I would do that eagerly. That is to say, I would go through it and start adding divs when I realize that I need them. I like to keep my HTML as clean as possible, clean as simple as possible. Every tag that I put into my HTML that doesn't actually provide any sort of semantic value is just another sort of, another sort of messy part of the HTML. So I'll think about that as I go. I think as I go from top to bottom, that's usually how I like to style a page, and it starts to. You don't really need to start with this whole sort of bird's eye view thought about how every individual thing is going to be styled on the page. I think as we go, we'll realize like, oh, we are going to start to have to add a class to this or that. But sticking with the most basic of elements and the simplest styles possible is a really good way to approach it. Yeah.
So what happens if someone gives you a wireframe? Would you go about it by like taking that wireframe and being like, okay, this is the content on the page, and then we first just transpose whatever content into HTML?
Yeah, just like we did.
About, like,
Exactly, just like we did, we would do that because hopefully this is a little bit of an opinion, but hopefully whoever gave you the wireframe was working off of somebody's content, was working off of someone else's written content. Like the way at least that my agency works, the company that I work for, Lab Zero, is that we first have a content strategist come in and decide what pages there are on the site and what they convey. Then they go ahead and write the content of that page, and then they submit that to a designer who goes ahead and decides how it's going to be laid out and how it's going to be interpreted. So first things first is content, even on the design side. So when it comes to coding, it's the same thing. So that's why I just wrote all the content out. So as you can see, this is not a beautiful page, but it's a functional page, other than the broken link, broken image. This is, it works, right? If for some reason the CSS didn't work, or if for some reason you cannot enjoy CSS because you're blind or otherwise just don't have access to a graphical browser, you would be able to use this page. So that's the important part. Cool. Right. Let's go ahead and look for a cool picture of me real quick. There we go.
And Tom Sawyer looks a lot like me.
Yeah, exactly. There we go. It's a slightly different one, but it's a good size. So I'm just going to save that into.
Do you typically always save it to local, or do you not use the link?
When it comes to the pages like this that I just found off of Wikimedia or something, I do not hot link. In most cases, I do not want to link to someone else's content because they're not considered content delivery networks or CDNs. They're not there for you to be able to just hot link from anywhere. A lot of websites know that you're loading content from not from their page, and they can take measures to combat that. Worst case scenario, they will go ahead and display really disgusting, gross pictures in the place of the images that you're hot linking. So don't do that. I would recommend in most cases that you download your stuff and host it locally. By locally, I mean it doesn't necessarily have to be on the same server as your website, but it must be on a server that you control. Like so maybe some sort of S3 something or other. It doesn't matter. Either way, let's just go ahead and download this locally, saving it as me.jpg.
A place like Wikipedia would be notable for all the stuff getting re-edited. So But how likely is it to stay around for a long time?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, like if it's stored on Wikimedia, then that means that anybody can upload a new version or delete it or whatever. And so that's not a great place to point to stuff that will always be there necessarily. Okay, so there we go. I've got my cool picture of me. Great. So now I have a fully functional page, right? Functional, not nice looking, but functional. Next up, let's style it. Okay. So the way we style is that we create a CSS file. So go ahead and save style.css into this folder. And then we have to link these two things together using a link tag. So up in the head, you add a link with an href style.css and a rel of style sheet. Both are necessary. All right, so now that we've done that, nothing will change on our page. Actually, one second. I keep moving back and forth between these things. I'm just going to go ahead and load up the file here. Great. Okay, so let's start styling it. Let's start at the top. We want to make this header blue and not stretch across the entire page, because as we can see, there's this nice sky blue color here and more of a cyan color here. So cyan. Yeah, so let's do that. I think it seems to me like this page only goes so wide, and then there's the same amount of space on the left and the right. This is very, very similar to what we did last class, where we gave the height a certain width. We gave the entire body itself a certain width, and then we centered it using the margin 0 auto little trick there. So let's first select the body. The body is going to be, I actually don't know how wide the body is going to be. Probably 960. I don't know. It's hard to tell because this screen is too small. One second. Sorry. Sorry if you get dizzy from me swinging back and forth so fast. Yeah, it looks like, oh, it's 1,000. Okay, so this is 1,000 wide. So body width 1,000 px, and the margin is going to be 0 auto. Now all of a sudden, we can. No, it doesn't. The reason I did that is because I have a habit of alphabetizing stuff. It's because I've got a lot of code quality tools that scold me for doing things a certain way, and one of them is that the properties need to be alphabetized for no good reason. That's just how I do it, though. So, So as you can see, you can now scroll back and forth on this thing, because it's 1,000 pixels wide. Okay. And if you were to zoom out so you could see 1,000 pixels, you'd see that it was centered. This whole content here is centered within a 1,000 pixel box. I just zoomed out though. Okay. Next up, header. The header is going to be this cool color. So let's go ahead and apply a color to the header. It's going to be cyan. Is that going to work? Yeah, there we go. Cyan. Next up, it looks like my radical website is centered within this box. So that's pretty straightforward. We're going to say header h1 is going to be text align center. Okay, and now it's centered within our box. Okay, here's where the fun starts. Truly the best personal website ever. Yes, it is. Mighty swell. We want this stuff to be on the left and the right of our heading. So we did learn in the last class how to position things to the left and the right of boxes. If we wanted to give this box, first we'd have to surround this in a box, which we haven't done in our HTML yet. It's really just plain text. But if we wanted to put, stick it on the left, regardless of where everything else on the page, we could use absolute positioning here. But I'm not going to. First thing that I'm going to do is surround each one of these inside some sort of element. What element should I use? Well, I could go through the entire spec of HTML and see if there's a perfect element to use for these little boxes here. The answer is not really. And so when it comes down to that, I will start using divs just to surround content inside arbitrary boxes that have no actual semantic meaning, but they're there for me to be able to just draw boxes on the page. So div is the element that I use in those cases. Div, but divs are pretty much useless on their own. I usually want to give them a class so I can distinguish them between each other. Otherwise, that would mean I'd style every single div on the page, which is definitely way heavy-handed, more heavy-handed than I need. So I'm just going to call this div class callout. So that's kind of what it is, maybe. And this is another callout here. Cool.
Is there a reason you don't just put both of those in one div tag as opposed to splitting it out into two?
Because this is the first one and this is the second one. They are separate from one another, so they both need to be separate guys. Okay. So I want one of them to be floated to the left and one of them to be floated to the right. There's a whole bunch of weird CSS selector stuff where I could say, like, I want the second child of this header to be floated to the left, or the third child to be floated to the right. I don't really want to do that. I'd much prefer to simply give these additional classes that distinguish them from one another, like call out first and call out second or something like that. So I'm going to say this is going to be call out first and call out second. I don't use call out left and call out right. I usually like to keep positioning words out of my HTML, even with class names. So rather than having a class of bold or blue or left or right or underlined or anything like that, I prefer to use stuff that's a little bit more meaningful. And in this case, I would say call out first, call out. I can even say something like call out, best and call out swell, right? Because that even better describes what each of these callouts is talking about, right? So maybe I'll use that instead to even better sort of distinguish the two. A note on my syntax, I use dashes in between words, certain words in classes to notate that the thing on the right is modifying the thing on the left. This is part of a naming convention called BEM, block element modifier syntax. And when I use dashes, it means that best is modifying callout. So, just a little thing that I do. You don't have to do it, but that's how I type my CSS or my classes. So callout and callout best. Okay, so every callout is going to have a border of 2px groove, I think. No, not groove. 2px inset? Is inset what I'm looking for? Yeah, that's what I want. 2px inset. There's a whole bunch of different border styles other than solid that you might consider using, but solid is definitely the most popular because it's just plain. But in this case, I've decided to make them look a little 3D, so inset is the style. Okay, 2px inset. All right, I think we're finally at the point where we can start floating these guys. I want to go ahead and float truly the best personal website ever on the left and mighty swell to the right. So call out, sorry, not left, best is going to be float left. Call out swell is going to be float right. So let's see what happens. It's not going to be pretty. Oh, goodness. So something weird happened. You should see that truly the best personal website ever is now to the left of sites I know all about. And yes, it is mighty swell is over here on the right. So what happened specifically? This is what happened. When you float something, it moves to the left of the page and it moves to the right of the page. Anything that comes after it tends to sort of overlap it or wrap around it, depending on whether it's a block or inline element or inline content. So let's get into that a little bit more in detail. You'll notice that box 1 and box 2 are actually aligned with each other horizontally. They're one's on the left and one's on the right of each other. They're on the same line. But they are underneath my radical website, where I actually wanted them to be kind of exactly to the left and to the right of them, which is a little too bad. And also, the weirdest part is that sites I know all about seems also to be aligned with truly the best personal website ever, and yes, it is mighty swell. Why is that happening? The reason that that's happening is because you have to understand what floating is all about. Floating something to the left, anything that comes after it overlaps it. When you float something, it's kind of like you're making a position absolute, which is why I taught last week's class first. Because floating is actually a little similar to position absolute. You give something a float, everything that comes after it acts as if it's not there. A container that contains a floated element acts as if it's not there. In fact, the only things that really act as if that floated element is still there are other floated elements. If you have element 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're all floated to the left, coming one after another, they will stack horizontally next to each other. So they're kind of in their own little float world. But anything that comes after it does not act as if it's there, except for inline content. So let's see what I mean by that. Let's inspect this sites I know all about heading. This H1 that lives inside my aside. So really strange, right? You see that the margin is actually above the floated stuff that comes before it. The content, that is to say the very top of that blue box, seems to be aligned with the tops of those floated elements as well. So that definitely tells us that this heading is acting as if those floated elements simply are not there, right? Because it's starting at the same line that these floated elements would have started at, had they not been there and whatever else. So next up, sites I know all about. The actual text is wrapping around the floated element because that's what inline text does. Inline content does know that floats are there. So even if the box that it's inside doesn't know it's there, as you can see, it's overlapping the stuff that comes before it, the inline content does wrap around it. Which means, if we go to an article in the New York Times, let me see if something, oh God, please. Let's read something not as terrible, and let's go ahead and, here, that's better. Let's go ahead and open up an incognito window so we can skip the paywall. That's a little hacking going on here. Let me see if I scroll down the page and eventually see a floated element. Yeah, here we go. Here's one. So let's take a look at this little guy on the left here. This is a figure. Remember we added a figure to our page? Because this figure, it contains some image content that is tangential to the main content. It's kind of like a little related link. Related links, great. Put them in a figure. So this figure here is floated to the left. If it was not floated to the left, it would look like this. See how it's kind of taking up all the space and this paragraph shows up underneath it instead? But when I float it, the paragraph, actually not this paragraph, but the one that comes after it, seems to wrap around it. See that there?
What would you do to get it to be like flush in line with the text as opposed to all the way aligned to the left of, I guess, the body?
Well, I can do a few things. I mean, each one of these story body paragraphs has a margin left of 75. I could give this figure a margin left of 75 as well. And then all of a sudden it would be in line with everything else. That's kind of what's going on there. But yeah, so the reason that the text is flowing around it is because the paragraphs that the text is inside are acting as if that figure is not there. Look at this. Paragraph 1, paragraph 2. You see how they're just overlapping the figure? check out the little map there, and you see how the paragraph, the blue and the orange area, is just sitting on top of it. But the inline content inside it, and on Tuesday night, blah, 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 and Goofy Elizabeth Warren, those are flowing around the figure. So the fact that this figure is floated means two things: that content that comes after it overlaps, that boxes that come after it overlap it, content that comes after it flows around it, just wraps around it. So that's how text wrapping works in most cases on the internet. So those are things that you need to understand. Floating can get really complicated really fast. So next thing is, why do these elements appear underneath my radical website? Well, the reason for that is actually quite simple. Call out best and call out swell are underneath my radical website because my radical website is just a simple heading. Whatever is underneath it, floated or not, absolute or not, they're not absolute. Whatever they are, they're going to be underneath the heading because that's just how stacking works. Anything that comes after this heading is going to be underneath it. So that's pretty straightforward. So how do we get these callouts to be to the left and the right of this heading and not to the left and the right of this heading of the aside? Well, the answer is it's not that easy. There are a few different ways we can do it, and I don't really like any of them. The most common way that people would do this, if they want something to be to the left and the right of something, is actually put it before it in the HTML. And this usually, to me, is a big red flag because I don't like changing my HTML. Well, I can add stuff to the HTML, but I don't like changing the order of my HTML elements just to get it to render right in CSS. So that's not really happy. But everything else is even hackier. I could make this heading absolute, which means that anything that even comes after it doesn't treat it as if it's there. And all of a sudden these things move up, but so does everything else. And so I need to like space everything out, and it gets really weird really fast. So I'm going to go ahead and say that from a content perspective, it's not so important that these little callouts appear before the heading. In fact, if you think about it, it's almost kind of a lead-in. Truly the best personal website. Yes, it's money swell. It's my radical website, right? So think of it that way. Great. So I'm going to go ahead and actually change my HTML to appease my CSS, which usually should be considered a red flag. You usually should not have to do this. But as you can see, having done that, it seems to do what we want for the most part. There's some padding that we need to add in, but as you can see, now these things do seem to look as if they're inside the header, which they are. And my radical website, being a regular block element, is not pushed down by it. The text does not wrap around it because it's centered. If the text was not centered, it would wrap around it. It would be sitting to the very right of truly the best personal website ever. But given that it's centered, it's not touching them, so it's nice in its own little area there.
So you just put the H1 underneath the divs?
That's right. Yeah, I just moved the divs. Yeah, exactly. I moved the H1 underneath them, and that solved the problem. So as we can see, floats are temperamental. What you have to remember is that floats do not affect the placement of stuff underneath them, except for the inline content. Okay. Next up. I'm going to continue on. If I have time, I'll deal with padding. Yeah. Oops, sorry. Yes. Yeah.
You said that's a red flag. And will that cause site to not show right on certain browsers?
No. No, I mean, you can put whatever content you want in your HTML. But what I'm talking about, a red flag, is that you should make your website HTML first. The HTML should be the most important, most accessible, consumable part of your page. The fact that you need to rearrange elements in your HTML to make your CSS come out right usually means you're doing something wrong. In this case, that's not so much the case. We did have to put our elements behind it. Fortunately, even without CSS, the page still reads pretty well. Maybe it would make a little sense if the words were after the heading instead of before. But when it all comes down to it, it's not a really big deal. So, no, I mean, we're not causing any bugs or rendering error. No, none of that. It's just all about the meaning of the page has been changed because we had to do our CSS a certain way. And that usually should be the other way around, right? That the HTML dictates how we write our CSS, not CSS dictating how we write our HTML.
Now, do you find yourself looking at the website after you've got most of it done? Do you turn off CSS and give it a once over, and then?
That would be great. I usually make the assumption that I haven't made significant changes to the point where things just look a little weird. But yes, there are a lot of cases where you turn off your CSS. I mean, it's simple as basically going into your head here and going ahead and deleting this link tag. Delete. All of a sudden, it looks like this, right? And you can see, oh gosh, all of these things are on the exact same line as one another because I used inline elements when I should have used divs instead or something. Or something like that. So yeah, sometimes I do that, and it definitely does inform how your website might be consumed by a search engine or a screen reader. So that is sometimes an important thing from accessibility or SEO standpoint. So yeah, it's a good practice. I'm usually too busy to do that, and my company doesn't specifically specialize in accessibility, so there is that. My wife, on the other hand, she does specialize in accessibility, and she scolds me for not doing it, so that's cool. Either way, okay, so right, let's continue on. Let's go to the Holy Grail layout, the 3-column sidebar, main column, and right column. Okay, so even though this aside is over here on the right, I am not going to float it to the right. And even though this thing is in the middle, I'm not going to make it unfloated. To me, each one of these columns is simply sitting to the left of one another. Column 1, column 2, column 3, float left, float left, float left. They'll all just stack horizontally from the left to the right, rather than one being on the left, one being on the right, and one being in the center. See the difference? So let's go ahead and do that. It's really straightforward. We select the asides on the page, and we select the main on the page, and we do this. Ta-da. Simple as that.
What is a side comment? It just means is comment the first element after the aside?
No, comma means that we are selecting multiple things. So this rule selects all asides on the page, and it selects all main elements on the page. So as you can see, there's a main here, and there's an aside here. So this rule is going to apply to anything on the page that matches either aside or main.
So you could list like a ton. You could list
Yeah.
all the divs.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, or you could just say aside main comma div, and it would select all divs. Or you could say aside main call out, or whatever you want. You just keep separating them in commas, and you can select as much stuff as you want. So yeah, float left takes care of stuff. So looks weird, but as you can see, they are sitting to the left of one another, right? Stacked horizontally, like we want. It'll look a little bit better once we start giving these things background colors, so let's go ahead and do that. Asides are going to have a background of orange, or are they? We'll get back to that in a second about why they might or might not be orange. And main is going to be background white. Why white? Because the page, I forgot to do this, but the entire page is going to be sky blue. The background, the actual body is going to be sky blue. So we need the main content to be white to sit on top of that sky blue background. As you can see, here's sky blue and here's white. Not so great, but a good start. Let's go ahead and make the body have a sky blue background.
Why body and not HTML?
Good question. Due to legacy rendering, if you give a background to the body, it actually will apply that background to the HTML. This is a weird little quirk which is meant to maintain backward compatibility, where there was no concept of the HTML element being rendered on the page. If you gave the body a background color, that would apply to the entire page. So it's only in this case, even though the body really does not stretch across the entire page, you give it a background, it will be that color. The entire window will be that color. If we wanted, though, we could say HTML background sky blue, and the exact same thing would work. So we can do that. That's just me being brief because I've already got a body selector here. And me just relying on sort of a little bit of a backward compatibility hack that browsers have. But yeah, it's a good point though, because as you can see, the body. No, here's something really funny. Look at the body. The body is 1,000 by 37 pixels. It's only that tall. Now, why is that? Can someone tell me why the body is only that tall? Because we use floats. The asides and the mains that are inside the body are not stretching the body out. Remember that when you float something, it's as everything else on the page acts as if it's not there, except for other floats, right? So the fact that the aside, main, and aside inside the body have been floated means the body no longer cares about them. It no longer stretches out to contain them, much like if they were positioned absolutely. So that's important. We're going to have to get to that in a little while, and remedy that, because that's going to become a problem, and we'll see why in a little bit. But in the meantime, here's our mockup. Here's our other stuff. We're going to start. We want to start to size these things in a certain way. Now, as you can see, the browser sort of took its best guess about how wide these things are. Well, not so much best guess as it tried to simply stretched these floats out based on the content inside them. That's another similarity that floats have with absolutely positioned elements, which is that they no longer stretch as far as they can. They only stretch as far as the content inside them. So as you can see, the reason this aside is this wide is because sites I know all about is that wide. This main image is this wide because chart detailing something is that wide. And all the tweets is that wide because the tweets are that wide, right? So that's what's going on there. How do we make them only go a certain width? Well, we just specify width. Pretty straightforward. Each one of these asides should be the same width. So how wide is that? Probably something like 200. So let's say that the aside is going to be width 200. Subtract that from 1,000 two times, and you've got a width of 600 for the main. So yes, in most cases when you want to float something and you do care about what size it is and how much it takes up on the page, you do need to give it a width. So width and floats, they go well together. There we go. Column 1, column 2, column 3. The site is pretty much laid out how we want, but there's a lot of extra blue space there. Where is this blue space coming from? Why is there sky blue underneath this column? Why is there sky blue in between this stuff? What's going on here? Okay, so let's try to fix that. Let's start at the top. The reason that my Radical website, that this header has text above and below it, is because of margin overflow. We've talked about this for a few classes now. Anything that has a vertical margin will overflow its parents as long as the parents aren't restricting them in some way. That is to say, this heading, see that I've just inspected this H1? The orange area seems to overflow outside of its header. The header is the cyan area, but the heading inside it, the H1, the orange area kind of goes outside. That is the margin overflowing its container. That has an added effect of if you have two things with margin sitting right next to each other, that margin will also overlap to the point where the biggest margin wins. So like you got something with a margin bottom of 50 and a margin top of 100, they will be spaced out by 100 pixels. Cool? So in this case, the margin is actually overflowing outside of the header. How do we fix this? Well, let's take a look at the mockup. It turns out that this mockup has quite a lot more space than just what we saw there. Specifically, it looks like this space on this header surrounds the entire header. It goes all the way across. What I'm getting at is that this header has padding. Now, an interesting thing about this margin overflow property is that padding prevents margin overflow. If a container of this H1 has padding, all of a sudden the margin will no longer overflow. Okay? So if we were to give this header padding, then we would see that there is no longer any space from the top of the page or at the bottom of the page because the margin of the heading is contained. So let's see that work. Header, I'm going to give it a padding of, I think this is 20, if I remember correctly. Yes, it's 20. So a padding of 20 pixels, which will be applied to all 4 sides. And now, as you can see, the margin of this heading is now contained entirely within the content area of this header because the header has padding. So as you can see, me moving down moving between the heading and the header. The header's greenish padding area is not being overlapped by the margin, by the heading's yellowish, orangish margin area, right? So I just defeated margin overflow using padding. All right, and now it's a really big, nice heading. By the way, the reason that these things are on multiple lines instead of a single line is because I restricted the width of these guys. Otherwise, that is why, while these guys stretch as far as they need to go, these ones don't. So let's go ahead and restrict the width of these guys. I'm going to say these are, that's not a good thing. I don't know, something like, I guess they're 125 across. How did I do that? Oh, I see. They're 100 plus a certain amount on both sides. I see. Yeah, okay, let's just make these 120 for now. So each call out is going to be width 120. There we go. It looks a little bit better. You might notice that the font for this entire page is wrong. This is Times, whereas this is Helvetica. So if you want to go up to the body and give this a font family of Helvetica, or let's say actually sans serif, which is even better, then it will look how we want it to look. So that's getting better. All right, now we got rid of the sky blue spacing from the top and the bottom because the heading margin no longer overflows. But what about this over here? What about this down there? Why are these asides not stretching all the way to fill up this area here?
They're the size of the content.
Exactly, they're the size of the content. There's nothing special about floats that make them stretch any farther than they have to vertically, right? That's the case for every block element on the page. It only stretches as tall as the content inside it. So how are we going to make these asides the same height as this main thing? We could do it the really terrible way and say, oh, well, it looks to me like this main is currently 327 pixels tall. So let's go ahead and add a height of 327 to a side 1 and side 2. Great, we're done. Time to go home. Not really, because all of a sudden you change the main heading. So you change the main content and the height's different, right? So you obviously do not want the content inside your HTML to dictate what explicit widths you should put into your CSS and vice versa. But either way, so how do we fix this? Well, here's another thing. What if we didn't what if we didn't stretch these things out? What if instead of applying this big orange area to these asides, that we simply surrounded these three elements in something else, a big box surrounding all three of them, and that has the orange background? Wouldn't that work? Because that nice rectangle would surround all three of these things and would stretch all the way to contain this guy here, which means that the big orange would go all the way across. So let's go ahead and create a div that surrounds these three things. Let's say div class, I don't know, container is fine for now.
And then do you use the Z layer just to make sure it doesn't overlap all your other boxes?
Sorry? I use what?
How do you then make sure that like the entire orange block doesn't overlap? Do you then use Z layers to just like what goes on top of it?
Oh, you mean z-index? No, I don't need to determine that because it is containing everything else. It's going to be the back. This box is going to have things inside it, which means that it is going to appear behind everything. So it is the background of everything else inside it. So okay, we created a div class container, and we surrounded the aside, main, and aside inside that div. So as you can see now, we closed the div right at the very end of the body, at the end of that second aside. Cool? So now, let's create a class for container. I'm sorry, a rule for container, and move that background orange from the aside to the container, and let's see what happens. Failure. It didn't work. Can someone tell me why it didn't work?
You need to inherit the background from the div that it's shown. So the asides need to inherit the background from the div and not the main.
So you want the aside to have a background of inherit? That actually works, but it sets us back to where we were originally. Inherit actually does inherit properties from the parent, but that's not what we want in this case. We don't want the asides to have a background color. I'll say that much. We want...
They need to be transparent.
Huh?
They need to be transparent. Asides.
What, the asides?
Yeah, the background.
Okay. All right, they're transparent. These sides are already transparent. Background transparent is the default styling for asides. In fact, you can tell because you see sky blue, right? And that's the style of the entire body, right? So that you can already see through them because that sky blue color is coming through. So why is this container not showing up?
It's ignoring everything that's fluid.
It's ignoring everything that's floated, exactly. This container contains three floated elements. We already had this problem earlier. It contains two asides and one main, all of which are floated. And as we said earlier, floated elements do not affect things around them that are not floated. Or another way of putting it is a non-floated container will not stretch out to accommodate its floated children, right? So let's look for the container on this page. Let's inspect the page and try to find it. See where it lives. Here it is. The div container is right there, and it has a width of 1,000 and a height of 0. It has a height of 0. 0 is the default height of every element when there's nothing inside it. So the container thinks there's nothing inside it. How do we fix this? Clear fix. Let's talk about that. So we haven't talked about clearing. Actually, yeah. I'm actually gonna skip this for a second. We'll get back to it because I'm gonna do a little side story, and then we'll get back to actually solving this problem. We want this cool picture of me to appear to the right of, hi there, this is my cool site. We're gonna have a similar problem here with this cool picture of me, which is that this figure needs to appear to the right of, hi there. But remember how, so first of all, let's go ahead and just style our figure. Let's go ahead and say figure float right. So not exactly where we want it, right? this cool picture of me is now floated to the right of chart detailing something. We want it to be to the right of hi there. Why is it to the right of this and not to the right of hi there? Pretty straightforward. That's just how it works, right? I mean, it's underneath, from a code perspective, this figure is underneath heading 1 and paragraph, which means it will appear below it. So the easiest thing to do, and the thing I'm going to do right now, just because I'm lazy, is put the figure above the heading, and ta-da, there you go. Still makes me cringe a little bit when I do this, but it's the easiest way to deal with floated elements that need to appear to the right of something. Okay, so there's that. But let's go back to the mock-up. Look at this chart detailing how great I am heading. This chart detailing how great I am seems to appear below this floated element. But I thought that we said that floated elements, that non-floated elements, don't know about them, don't know that they're nearby, right? Because that's what's happening here. This heading seems to just simply overlap our picture of Tom Selleck, right? Because that's what non-floated elements do around floated elements. So how are we getting this chart detailing something to appear underneath it? No, we're not giving it a float itself. It is still a regular block element. But there's a special property that we can give this chart detailing how great I am that will make it acknowledge floats and clear them. And it's called clear. So inside my main, I've got my H2, which is chart detailing how great I am. And I'm going to say clear right. Now, all of a sudden, this chart detailing something is now down at the bottom of the main because it acknowledges that there might be right-floated divs behind it or right-floated elements before it, and it will make sure not to interfere with those. It will clear them so it does not overlap any floated elements that come behind it, right?
So like clear is like to have clearance, that meaning of clear?
Pretty much, yeah, clearance. Yeah, it's like clearing a jump or whatever. Like you are coming after it. It knows now that there is a floated element behind it, a right floated element specifically, and so it is going to clear it and appear underneath it. So when I did that, you might have noticed that the main became a little bit taller, right? Because now this main is stretching out to accommodate the thing that appears underneath it. If I didn't do that, if I got rid of H2 and I got rid of this clear here, all of a sudden this figure, oh interesting, hold on a second. This main would only be this tall. That's actually interesting. Why is it accommodating this figure which is floated to the right? Huh, magic. I actually do not know. I feel like it should only be this tall because again, certain elements do not stretch out to accommodate their floated stuff inside them. Well, I'm not going to spend a lot of time figuring that out. Unfortunately, let's just chalk that up as one of the mysteries of CSS. But as you can see, by giving this thing clear of right, it does make the main a little bit taller because this is clearing it. So now, going back to our other problem, which is that the container doesn't stretch all the way down. Wouldn't it be possible to put something at the very bottom of this container that acknowledges that there are other elements that come before it, but it clears them, which in turn causes the container to go down and stretch to accommodate that non-floated item? Think of it this way. Item number 1, item number 2, item number 3. If we had a 4th item and it cleared all those 3 items, the container would have no choice but to stretch all the way down to accommodate its 4th child, right? So let's try that out. I'm going to go ahead and create just a plain old div here. I'm going to give it a class of clear. This div with a class of clear is just going to sit right here after the aside. In this clear class, let's go ahead and type this in. This clear class is going to look like this. clear both. Both means that it's going to look for both left and right floated elements and go underneath them. Check it out. It kind of worked. This works as long as the main column is the tallest column. So if I did put that chart in there, or whatever, I went ahead and like added a whole bunch of rows to this table. You know, I'm going to do this a few times. Okay, great. Now this is the tallest thing, and it is taller than the left and the right column, which means that the container, which has that orange background, is stretching down to accommodate that clear div, which is down here at the bottom. So opening up the body, opening up the container, take a look at this div class clear. It's 1000 by 0, it's down at the bottom, and it is the reason why this container is now stretching to accommodate everything that comes before it. Because the fact that this is a regular old element that's not floated means that the container must stretch to accommodate it. Meaning that everything that comes before it, which is floated, they count. Now, I don't like this approach. We talked earlier about how I don't like modifying HTML to make CSS work better. We already had to do this a few times with rearranging items in our HTML to make the floats work. But I don't like this guy down here. I don't like this div class clear. I think that having to put a little div class clear everywhere throughout my entire code would make it look really weird and make my HTML look especially brittle, especially if I decided to stop floating something later on, you know? It would really create a lot of dependencies in my HTML on stuff in my CSS, and I don't want that to happen. So how do I do this instead? I use something called the clearfix hack. The clearfix hack pretty much does this, but entirely in CSS. How does that work? CSS has this concept of things called pseudo elements. Let's talk about pseudo elements. Let's see if I can get a good diagram of how those work. Let's see here. No, that's bad. That's also bad. Yeah, this is good. So, take a look at this box here. Don't worry about need more. Please do not look at need more. But take a look at this box here. This box, the content of this box is, this is a quote without quotation marks. If you took a look at the HTML for this image, it would be div, this is a quote, but those quotation marks wouldn't be here. What's actually happening is that in the CSS, we're adding these little before and after rules inside our CSS, which are adding on quotation marks for us. So essentially what's happening is CSS is adding extra little elements into our HTML with the pure power of just CSS and not having to change our HTML at all. So if you think about it, with that clear thing that we just did, we added a div at the very bottom of our container. With CSS, we could use the after pseudo element to put a little thing at the very bottom, which does the work for us. I'm not going to walk us through writing every single line to generate this clearfix thing, because in the real world, I don't go ahead and write this thing every single time. So I'm really just going to go ahead and Google up clearfix hack. And this thing at the top, the micro clearfix hack, is what we want. Go ahead and copy these rules here. Don't worry about IE 6 and 7 because no one uses those browsers anymore. Just use these two things and copy them into your CSS file. Actually, go ahead and replace clear with them. CF stands for clearfix. It doesn't have to be that. You can really call the rule whatever you want. It's your CSS file. But the before and the after does matter. What's happening here is that by giving anything with a class of clearfix after it, a content of blank, means that that pseudo element is going to appear. Display table, I kind of forget what's happening there. But clear both means that the after pseudo element is going to go ahead and clear anything that comes before it. So let's go ahead and instead of adding this class clear here, I'm going to get rid of this div. And I'm going to go up to this div here and make this container have an additional class of CF. And now, this div only has 3 elements, but it also has a before and after pseudo element, which have been added by the CSS. And specifically, this after pseudo element has a clear of both. And that is what is causing the container to stretch down to accommodate it. So no extra HTML, just being able to style that element with the CF class applies that stuff. So again, I don't expect you to fully understand this. The good thing is you don't have to. You can just copy these 3 properties into your CSS file and apply CF wherever you need to. And any element that needs to accommodate floated elements in terms of their height, it'll just work. So that's great. Yeah, and modern browsers like Chrome will actually insert the little before and after pseudo elements into your DOM tree there, so you can go ahead and see them and see how they're styled. Okay, so that's it. I definitely do not expect you to have understood everything I talked about here. I definitely do not expect you to be a master of floats. Floats are quite complicated. They are difficult. They have so many different quirks. The fact that nothing around them seems to acknowledge their existence, that they cause overlapping and collapsing and a whole bunch of strange stuff. The fact is that floats weren't really intended to be used for much more than just having an image and having text wrap around it. That was kind of the idea. But people took that and said, we can make these full multi-column layouts using this because that's what people want. They don't want to use tables anymore. They want to use elements that come one after another, but go stack horizontally instead of stacking vertically. And that's what floats have been used for a very long time. Until now, when we have a new standard called the CSS Flexible Box Layout, otherwise known as flexbox. So if anyone has any final questions about floating, we're going to go ahead and make a copy of what we got here and turn it into a flexbox site. Any last requests? Okay, great. We're doing pretty well on time too, because flexbox isn't going to take as long to talk about. This is what I'd like you to do. Assuming that you have a pretty well functioning site that looks like this, I want you to make a copy of it. If you don't, then please ask me if you'd like to take a look at any specific code here. Worst case scenario, I can go ahead and upload it right now, and you can download it from GitHub to get the copy that I'm using. Is there anything that anyone's missing?
I think we have to go through it, but for some reason when I added the CF properties, it changed it to this. I don't know why.
Chances are that it was pasted in the wrong way and might have broken something else in your CSS file. Let's see. No, that's not the case.
Yeah.
That looks fine. I'm just checking for any missing brackets. I don't see any.
Yeah. I didn't upload an image. I don't know if for some reason your image just because I didn't upload it there.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, no, that's fine actually.
What did it do? It shifted the main body to the left.
It looks to me like the div class container is actually outside of the main and inside. It looks like it's closed right here, but it actually should be closing at the end of the main and inside right here.
Got it.
So just move that ending div down.
Nice catch, thank you.
You have a problem?
Yeah, there is only at the
In that case, I'm going to go ahead and upload it real fast, and then you can go ahead and just download it. And yeah,
When
so
you put in a picture,
yeah.
and you're downloading and pictures are coming in all different shapes and sizes, and then you put it in there. And if you want it to basically shrink it down, can you just put it in a div and control the width and height of it, or is there a better way to do that?
Yeah. So
Or you just set the image width and height to whatever you want to.
there are a few things you can do. With an image, you are actually encouraged to set the width and the height in the HTML, surprisingly enough.
Oh.
I don't really exactly understand why, but people say due to accessibility reasons that sometimes you might want to specify exactly that an image is of a certain size. But images are a little tricky. There aren't really many good cases for actually using images in general. What I mean by that is that if you want to load up an image file and it's for decorative purposes only, like you want to have some sort of like nice background color or background image or some sort of nice little flourish next to something or a horizontal rule that looks prettier than usual, you usually don't use an image tag for that. You really only use images for photographs, for diagrams, for drawings, for portraits, for things that actually somehow augment your content or are part of your content. Okay, so anyway, to answer your question, you can use CSS to select the specific image and give it a width and a height. You can use just HTML to specify width and height properties. Like you could say, no, not figure, the actual image itself. You'd want to say image source width 200 or something, and all of a sudden it's 200 or something. And then you can also say height 20, and all of a sudden you got a very flat Tom Selleck. So either height or width, and it'll go ahead and sort of specify, do what you want. Or you can do that in CSS as well. I sort of forget the pros. I can think of cons, but I can't really think of pros of doing it this way, other than the fact that the standard says you can, and that in some cases you should. I would read up more on it because I sort of forget. I don't really use images often from day to day because I'm not really working with very graphical websites. I'm working with websites that have a lot of styling, which is where I use background images and other sorts of parts of CSS that allow me to load up image files, but I don't usually use image tags because there's a semantic difference there. But anyway, you can do that, but usually it has to do with modifying the image itself. Yeah, like the image tag itself, either via HTML or CSS. Okay, so sorry, I uploaded that thing. If you want to go ahead and download it, then you can go to jeffreyhw./fwd on GitHub and go ahead and either clone my repository or you can download the zip file. And I just went ahead and uploaded Series 9, Class 16. There we go. And I also realized that I haven't answered any questions online the entire class, so I'm sorry about that. I have no questions online. Okay, never mind. So, okay. Again, it's Series 9, Class 16. If you want to go ahead and download that stuff, you will be up to date. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder inside here called flexbox. And I'm going to copy everything that I've done and paste it into that folder. So your folder should look like this. The same content inside and outside of the flexbox thing. I next recommend that you close all of your browser tabs that have the current site open, and that you also close any tabs in your text editor that have the current site code open, because you want to open up the new stuff inside the flexbox thing. Or actually, it might just be easy to call the folder float and then deal with the stuff that's outside of it as, I don't know, whatever. Either way, just make sure that you are not modifying the stuff outside of the folder. You're modifying the stuff inside the folder. So please close all of your text editor and browser tabs that currently have the site open. Now let's go into Flexbox and go ahead and edit this new index.html file and CSS file. So go ahead and actually, I'm just going to open up this entire folder. There we go. Cool. So, assuming that you're in the Flexbox folder, by the way, if you ever feel like navigating through your folder structure from the title bar of any window, you can command-click, and it will show you which file you've got opened up within the folder structure. So that's kind of cool. Anyway, cool. So that is on Mac, of course. Let's go ahead and change some of our floated stuff into Flexbox stuff. before I do that, let's talk about what flexbox is. So, flexbox. Background. Flexbox layout aims at providing a more efficient way to lay out, align, and distribute space among items in a container, either horizontally or vertically. By default, it's horizontally, though. So the idea is that you have a container, and then you have items. So, just like we created our container class, and we have some elements inside it, same deal. The container is here in purple, the items are there in orange. And you can specify a direction of your items inside the container. They can go like column reverse, column, row, or row reverse. So you can have them go left to right, right to left, down, from up to down, or down to up. Flex grow allows the items inside the container to take up an equal amount of space, or as much space as they need, kind of filling in the gaps. Flex wrap allows items to wrap onto the next line, very much like words on a page, or very much like float items. We didn't talk about this, but if you keep floating stuff and you run out of space, it'll just drop onto the next line. So flex wrap kind of does the same thing. Justify content. You can specify that you want your items inside your container to stack up on the left, stack up on the right, stack up in the center, distribute space between them, or distribute space between and around them. You can align items. You can say that you want them to be on the top or the bottom. You can also say that you want items to be aligned on the top, on the bottom, centered, stretched out, or along some sort of baseline. So this center here, along with center for justify content or space between, is a perfect way of aligning any box in the exact horizontal and vertical center of any other box, regardless of the size of either one of them. That is finally the perfect, easy way to center a box on the center of the page. Just using CSS, not worrying about the size of anything. So there we go. There's that. Yeah, and then align content. You can take the entirety of the whole thing, sit it at the top, sit at the bottom, stretch everything out, determine space between the actual wrapping lines of your flex content. So there's a lot of stuff you can do there. So a lot of different properties, a lot of stuff to learn. You keep this cheat sheet open, and it's easy as hell, though. It really is. You just specify the container as flex, and all of a sudden its items no longer stack vertically, they just stack horizontally. That's it. So here's what I'm going to do. The first thing I'm going to do is go into my CSS, find every instance of float, and get rid of it. So goodbye float, goodbye float, goodbye float, goodbye clear, goodbye float, and goodbye clearfix. So anywhere you saw float or clear, just get rid of it. Keep the rules though, because we might need them. These little rules here. Just keep them empty. So the page should look like this. Not that great. Well, let's start flexing. I'm going to go ahead and start with my header. As we know, the header contains three things: 2 callouts, and then the H1. I'm going to go ahead and say that the header is going to have a display of flex. This is what it looks like. Item 1, item 2, item 3. The next thing that I want is for these items to be evenly distributed. So I go over here to justify content and say that I want there to be space between the items. See, this is the sort of thing that I want. Call out on the left, then the heading in the middle, then call out on the right. So let's say justify content space between. And of course, what's the last thing we have to do? Much like with floating, you kind of have to take into consideration the order of your elements. Unless you don't want to, and specific items inside your flex container can actually be reordered. It's actually kind of crazy. You can specify an order of elements. So if the elements do have an order in your HTML, you can reorder them using pure CSS by specifying order. So if you want to say order is 2, it'll appear at the end. So let's do this. I'm going to say callout best is going to be order 1. Callout swell is going to be order 3. And then header h1 is going to be order 2. There you go. Without changing the HTML at all, I have now specified the flex order of these elements. You might notice that as I hover over these, it goes 1, 3, 2, but at least they're laid out the way I want them to within my flex container. So that's really straightforward. You just specify order. You can also just specify the order of one of them, like whatever one appears at the end, right? And then it'll just move to the end. So good stuff. Okay, so we did that. Next, let's talk about div class container. Let's make our container a flex container. Pretty straightforward. Let's go down to container here, make it display flex. Wow. That was extremely easy. I'm almost done. What happened here was that because my container has an orange background, and because these things aren't floated, and because they're flex items, they sit horizontally next to each other. They all have explicit widths that I set, 200, 600, 200. It's going to stretch out to contain everything inside them. That's it. Pretty straightforward. Next up, let's make Tom Selleck on the right of this stuff. That's a little more difficult because, well, I don't know. Let's put this stuff on the left and this stuff on the right. The only problem here is that, hi there, and this is my super cool site. These two guys are two different elements. And if I was to somehow wrap these things in a flex container, then I would have hi there being on the left, this is my super cool site being in the middle, and then Tom Selleck being on the right, right? So I don't really want that. This is the part where I might have to add a few extra divs to do specifically what I want, which is putting this content on the left and putting Tom Selleck on the right. So first off, I'm going to go ahead and say, inside my main, I'm going to say div class, I don't know, intro, doesn't matter. Next, I'm going to rearrange these things because it makes a whole lot more sense for my heading to be on the top here, to be honest. So I've just done some HTML rearranging where this H1 and paragraph are now on the top. And now I'm going to say div class intro __ content. Oops, forgot a little quotation mark there. Hey, why did I use __ instead of dash dash? The reason for that is because this content is not modifying intro like callout best and callout swell are. In this case, this is content that is inside the intro. It is an element of the intro block. So I use __ to denote an element inside a block rather than a modifier on a block. So __ instead of dash dash. That's just my naming convention. Not mine, but the naming convention I use. Intro content inside intro. So as you can see here, this div class intro has two children, intro content and figure. Do you see where I'm going here? Let's go ahead and make the intro a flex container. Play flex. All right, not so great because cool picture of me is kind of in the center. Why is that? Because by default, flex items just stack to the left of one another, much like floated elements do. If we want to move this guy to the right, it's pretty straightforward. We've done it before. We just do justify content space between. And now the leftmost item will be on the left, the rightmost item will be on the right. There you go. Another thing worth noting, though, is that this intro content does not stretch all the way across. That's okay. I mean, it's perfectly fine because that's how wide this paragraph is. But if for some reason you wanted this intro content to say like have a different color or something, background yellow, that might look a little strange with this extra space here. Maybe you want it to kind of line up with the sides of this figure. You want it to stretch all the way across. There's a way that you can get certain items within a flex container to take up the remaining space. Excuse me. It's called flex grow. So it looks like this. We're going to make our intro content have a flex grow of 1. And that means now that we've justified the content such that there's space between, this is going to take up the remaining space. Whoops, what did I do? oh yeah, no, it's doing it. I just forgot to add that yellow, right? Background yellow, right? So now as you can see, it is taking up the remaining space and leaving the figure with its margin to have its little space on the right. So why flex grow 1? Why not flex grow yes or flex grow true? Because you can specify different numbers for flex grow. And if you have flex grow 1 and then you also have flex grow 2 will take up twice as much space as flex grow 1. So it's a really good way of having these kind of variable width things that are sized relative to each other. So that's what flex grow is good for. There's also flex shrink in case you don't want certain things to get smaller if there's not enough space for them. You can set flex shrink to 0, which means they will maintain their size, regardless of how they're getting squished in. That is it. We're done. That was flexbox. Flexbox is a lot easier to explain, a lot more functional, a lot more modern, which means that you do have to worry about which browsers support it. There's a website that will help you out. It's called caniuse.com. Can I use certain browser technology? You type in flexbox, and the answer is that globally, 94% of browsers support flexbox. That's pretty much a go for it. That's pretty much a saying like, yeah, you should use it.
What happens when you type in can I use Internet Explorer?
No, yeah, but Flexbox, specifically, Internet Explorer 8 and 9 don't support it. 10 is no longer listed on Can I Use because usage of 10 is so low that it doesn't even matter. It's negligible, which is nice to know. But 11, of which the global browser usage is 5.4%, only partially supports it. There are some caveats. Every other browser, though, Microsoft Edge, which is the new version, the newer, better browser that they've got out, and Firefox and Chrome, Safari, everything else supports Flexbox. Everything across the board. So the only thing you have to worry about is IE. And the good thing about Windows now, Windows 10 has 2 browsers. Internet Explorer is only for people who actively seek it out. Otherwise, Microsoft Edge is the default browser. It's very modern, very progressive and standards compliant, and Microsoft's done a very, very good job of making their browser, like working with standards bodies, making it compliant, pushing forward specs, and so if you use Windows 10 and for some reason you don't want to install Firefox, Chrome, Safari, Opera, Edge is perfectly fine. It really is. So anyway,
What's the likelihood that some of the old government input box sites would still require the IE?
Yeah, there's a possibility. I mean, like super old websites still might require things like ActiveX, which only is available in Internet Explorer 8 and below. But who cares? You know, if the problem is that the reason that certain people still use Internet Explorer 8 and certain people have to use 11 is because it's not necessarily their decision. Sometimes there's like old grannies or whatever, and they don't know better. But in some cases, in many cases, it's enterprises that are required due to compliance practices to use a certain browser. They need to use Internet Explorer 11 because the software that they're using was written specifically for use with that, and it can't be guaranteed that other browsers have been vetted or are going to work specifically the way that it needs to work. Even worse, there are some enterprise companies that set administrator privileges so people can't install the browsers they want. So that is one of the reasons why Internet Explorer still has some use, and one of the reasons why the web really hasn't been pushed forward as much as it could be. But really, when it comes down to it, 11 is not a terrible browser. Really, at the time that it came out, it was actually quite good. Unfortunately, Edge, much like Firefox, Chrome, not so much Safari and Opera, is an evergreen browser, meaning that it automatically updates itself with the newest stuff. So everyone's on version 13 of Edge. They'll be on 14 eventually when that becomes stable. Anyway.
What does IE 11 end up seeing if you use flexbox? Is it just going to be all stacked on top of each other?
Depends. There are known issues. IE 11 needs to have certain stuff set in certain ways. It only supports certain vendor prefix stuff. You might notice that if you go around caniuse.com, you'll get little yes, it's supported, and then there's a little yellow thing in the corner there. Whenever you see that yellow thing, it says that it's supported with prefix. You have to specify a specific prefix in order for that to work. Prefixed properties means that you are meant to add multiple of the same property with different prefixes to make it work. So let me see. I'm trying to think of a good example that's public that I've worked on. Nope, don't have any examples. But the idea is that you can use certain tools, one of the most popular ones being auto prefixer, which is a little post processor for your CSS. Once you're done with your CSS, you run it through auto prefixer, which is usually an automated part of your build, which will go ahead and query caniuse.com and ask it whether any of the properties that you have used in your CSS need to be vendor prefixed for widest adoption possible. So the way that Flex ends up is that you not only have display Flex, but you have display WebKit Flex, or display Box, display MS Flex. You'll see certain properties show up 4 times for different browsers to be able to support them, because that's how the browsers were built in order to try to adopt new technologies before they were fully standardized. So auto prefixer takes care of all that for you. You can just run it through. There's a web interface for it. There's CLI, JavaScript, you know, add it to Rails, add it to Grunt, Gulp, Webpack, whatever you want. It's all out there. So there's a lot of different ways that you can run it through that and get the widest adoption possible for Flexbox. You might also have to consider these rules if you are developing for IE 11, but I really haven't had to worry about that myself personally. So, you know. Anyway, that's Flexbox. Despite the caveats, which will really go away in like a year, it's often a much better solution than floating. So I love using it. I'm so happy that I get to use it rather than having to worry about clearing and floating and collapsing and all that other stuff. Cool. So I think that's it for today. Any questions? Any thoughts?
Is Flexbox what Bootstrap uses for the 12 columns?
No. Bootstrap uses floats for its columns. Bootstrap 4 has opt-in Flexbox. Bootstrap 4 is not out yet, but when Bootstrap 4 comes out, you will be able to use 2 different grid systems. One that uses floats, like it always has, and the one that uses Flexbox instead. So yeah, grid systems are available in both flavors essentially, and Bootstrap will support both. But not yet. It's not out yet. You can still use it because it's an alpha, but whatever. But it's not stable release yet. Yeah, good question. Okay, so let's talk about next week. It will be next week. I will be here. Let's see here. What did I talk about last time around? I have to check out my curriculum from last time. Oh, modern CSS. Well, that's funny because I talked about flexbox in the previous one. But yeah, so next week we're going to be talking about CSS3 features, browser support. We're going to talk a little bit more about can I use and maybe implementing auto prefixer. We're going to talk about responsive design for mobile devices. So we are going to go ahead and take a site originally made with a column layout and go ahead and turn that into a responsive site depending on the screen size. So that's next week. We're going to talk about modern responsive, progressive design, etc. Cool. I have, as usual, an assignment. Unfortunately, this assignment is not on Flexbox. It is on floating. So I'll go ahead and post that. If you want to get notified of when it's available, join one of these 3 lists. Facebook group is a Facebook group, of course, but web dev, that's just email, and NoiseBridge Announce is that plus other NoiseBridge announcements. Go ahead and join that, and I'll be sending out an email probably tomorrow with the assignment. On Thursday, I come here. I'm here in person from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. in the classroom right behind me, the train classroom, where I sit and answer your questions. So you should feel free to come on over, ask me any questions necessary. I can draw stuff on whiteboards to explain in depth how floating works if you need to know that. You can bring whatever you want. Any project you're working on, so long as you're not getting paid to do it, I will be happy to help you out and answer any questions you have about any aspect of web development. So, yep, I'm here for that on Thursday at 7. Otherwise, Monday at 8, I'll be talking about modern CSS. Thanks for coming, and donate to NoiseBridge, and I'll see you guys next week. Goodbye.